They counted you out in a room you weren't invited to. They sat around a table, people who had decided your ceiling, calculated your limits, agreed on the version of you that would be allowed to exist, and they made their conclusions. They closed the file, they moved on. They were certain enough that they stopped watching, and that certainty, that comfortable assumption that you were handled and contained and finished, was the most catastrophic mistake they ever made. Because while they stopped watching, you were becoming. Not healing, not recovering, not slowly rebuilding the version of yourself they destroyed, becoming something they don't have a category for, something their confidence couldn't account for, something that was being forged in the exact fire they lit, with the exact pressure they applied, through the exact destruction they engineered. They handed you the materials and the conditions and the temperature. They just didn't know what those materials, under those conditions, at that temperature, were capable of producing. They produced you. The real you, the one that doesn't exist without what they did, the one that couldn't have been built any other way, the one that walks into every room now carrying something they can feel before you speak, before you move, before you do anything, just your presence announcing that something they thought they finished is not only not finished, it arrived. It became, it is here, and it is nothing like what they expected, and there is absolutely nothing they can do about it. This is not a comeback story. Comebacks return to what was before. What you are now has never existed. Before, there is no before to come back to, there is only what was built, in the destruction, standing now in full activation, occupying a level of power and clarity and freedom that the version of you that existed before their attack could not have accessed. They didn't set you back. They set you up, and the setup is complete. If you've been written off by people who had no idea what they were activating, type vengeance in the comments right now. The thing about vengeance that they never understood is that the most devastating kind is not loud. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't send warnings, it doesn't arrive in the form they were expecting and prepared their defenses for. It arrives in the form of your elevation, your expansion, your undeniable, visible, impossible to argue with becoming. It arrives in the form of results that contradict every conclusion they published about you, in the form of a life that refutes their narrative not through argument but through existence, through the sheer, inarguable fact of what you became while they were certain you were finished. They expected collapse, they got your coronation. They expected you to disappear, you became impossible to ignore. They expected the damage to be permanent, it was temporary. What it produced is permanent. What emerged from the damage is permanent. The version of you that exists on the other side of everything they did to you is not going anywhere, is not negotiable, is not subject to revision, based on their comfort or their ongoing efforts to contain what they released. Vengeance, when chosen souls embody it, is not an act. It is a state of being, a frequency that broadcasts continuously, a presence that cannot be walked back, cannot be minimized, cannot be reduced to the category of person they needed you to stay in for their world to make sense. You exceeded the category, you exceeded every calculation, and now they live in a world where you are what you are. And everything they did only accelerated the timeline to here. You were betrayed by someone who knew exactly where to strike. Not a stranger, someone with access, someone you trusted with the specific information that trust produces, the real version, the unguarded version, the version that exists only in relationships where you believed safety was mutual. They used that access, used what you shared, used the blueprint that your trust gave them and handed it to the exact people who could use it to do maximum damage. And for a period, a season that felt permanent while you were inside it, the damage was maximum. Everything that could be destabilized was destabilized. Everything that could be taken was taken. Everything that could be turned against you was turned. The precision of it was what made it devastating. It wasn't random, it was targeted. It hit specifically the things that would hurt most, would cost most, would take longest to recover from. Someone who knew you designed the attack, someone who had your trust rewarded themselves with your destruction. Here is what they didn't account for. What survives betrayal of that precision is not ordinary resilience. What survives targeted destruction by someone with full access to your vulnerabilities is something different, something that has been tested at a depth that random adversity cannot reach. What remains after someone who knew exactly where you were soft tried to break you there and failed, even though it didn't feel like failure for a long time, even though the cost was real and the damage was real, is a version of you that is now unbreakable at the exact depth they tested. They found the depth of you, tried to break you there, couldn't. And now you know something about yourself that you could not have known without them, that the deepest level is unbreakable, that the core is not vulnerable in the way they thought, that you hold, even under that kind of pressure, even when the attack is that precise, even when the person wielding it had everything they needed to finish you. You held. And what held cannot be shaken by anything less than what failed to shake it. That is armor they forged for you and handed over when they thought they were destroying you. If someone with full access to your trust handed it to your enemies, and you're still standing, type unbreakable in the comments. You know exactly who you are. There was a season when you were silent about what was done to you. Not because you had nothing to say, because you were processing something too large and too complex for the words available to you at the time, because the full shape of what happened hadn't revealed itself yet, and speaking too early would have meant speaking from the wounded place rather than from the understanding that the wound eventually produces. You went quiet while you were being transformed, and the people who attacked you interpreted your silence as defeat. They celebrated while you were becoming. They announced their victory while you were underground, in the dark, doing the work that darkness is for, the work that cannot happen in public. The dissolution of the old version and the emergence of the new. The burning away of everything that the attack revealed was not solid. The discovery of what was solid. The slow, irreversible construction of something that the fire confirmed rather than destroyed. They were celebrating a win that was actually the beginning of their loss. Every day they celebrated was a day you were deeper in formation. Every toast they raised was raised over a process they didn't understand was happening. Every assumption of your permanent defeat was built on the premise that people who go through what you went through don't come back. They were right about most people. They were catastrophically wrong about you. Because what they triggered in you by doing what they did was not a wound that stays a wound, it was an initiation, a forced entry into the specific crucible that produces chosen souls who cannot be managed, cannot be predicted, cannot be contained by the normal calculations that contain normal people. They put you in the fire thinking fire ends things. In chosen souls, fire begins things. The people who dismissed you were not stupid. This is important to understand, because it would be easy and satisfying to reduce them to incompetent, to conclude that they simply failed to see what you were because they weren't perceptive enough. But many of them were perceptive, were smart, were experienced in reading people and situations and potential, and they still dismissed you. They dismissed you because of what the dismissal cost them. Nothing. It cost them nothing. Dismissing you required no sacrifice, no courage, no real engagement with what you actually were. It was the easy move, the low-cost conclusion, the one that didn't require them to expand their understanding of what was possible or challenge their assumptions about who deserves to be elevated or confront the specific discomfort that your actual magnitude produced in them. Because some of them felt the magnitude. Some of them dismissed you specifically because they felt it, because something in them registered the frequency and understood what it meant, and chose to suppress that recognition rather than honor it, because honoring it would have required something from them, would have required extension of an acknowledgement that would shift the dynamic in ways they were not prepared to allow. So they called it something else, called it overconfidence or inexperience or wrong fit or not the right time or any of the 100 convenient labels that make the act of dismissal look like discernment, when it is actually self-protection. They protected themselves from the disruption your recognition would have caused. The disruption is coming anyway. It doesn't need their acknowledgement to arrive. It doesn't require their permission to land. The wave they could have decided to move with is still a wave. Their decision to stand against it doesn't slow it. It just determines their relationship to it when it arrives, and it is arriving. In the form of what you have become, in the form of results that cannot be categorized as luck, in the form of an elevation that contradicts every conclusion they published about your ceiling. They will recalibrate. Not because they want to, because reality will require it. Here is the cold reading that changes everything. You are not on a path to vengeance, you are already the vengeance, past tense in the cosmic record, even if the physical manifestation is still arriving. The confirmation happened before you read this, before this moment, in the accounting that exists beyond the visible, in the ledger that tracks what chosen souls are becoming and what the people who oppose them are experiencing in response. The ledger is already updated, the outcome is already recorded, the vengeance is already delivered. What you're watching happen in your life right now is not the beginning of something, it is the visible surface of something that has already been completed at a deeper level. The elevation arriving is not on its way, it is already yours, and what you're experiencing is the physical dimension catching up to what the energetic dimension already confirmed. They already lost. They just don't know it yet. And watching people who don't know they've lost continue operating as if the outcome is still in question, continue with their conclusions about your ceiling, their narratives about your limitations, their arrangements built on the assumption that you will remain where they placed you, is the specific satisfaction that chosen soul vengeance produces, the satisfaction of knowing before they know, of living inside the confirmed outcome while the people who opposed you are still inside, their certainty about your defeat. You know something they don't. You know how this ends. And it ends with you standing in everything they said was impossible. With your name in rooms they decided you wouldn't enter. With your voice carrying weight they decided you wouldn't earn. With your life becoming the specific evidence that their judgment was not just wrong but foundationally, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. Not almost wrong. Completely wrong. About everything that mattered. If you already know how this ends and you're just watching the physical catch up to what's already confirmed, type already won in the comments. Claim it. The ones who celebrated your lowest moment are in a specific kind of trouble right now. Not the trouble that arrives with noise and announcement, the quiet kind, the internal kind, the kind that shows up as a creeping recalibration of everything they believed about you, a slow erosion of the certainty they built their comfort on. A growing, unspoken, privately experienced awareness that something is not going the way they projected. They're watching you. Not the way they watched when they thought you were beneath their concern. The way you watch something you realize you underestimated. The way you observe something that is not conforming to the outcome you were confident about. With a specific quality of attention that is part fascination and part fear, part recognition and part resistance to what the recognition implies about everything they said and did and decided about you. Because your elevation indicts them. Not through argument, through existence. Every level you reach that they said you couldn't reach is a public statement about the quality of their judgment. Every room you enter that they said was close to you is a visible record of what their assessment was worth. Every result you produce that they said was beyond you is evidence that accumulates without you doing anything to accumulate it. You just have to keep rising. The indictment writes itself. And they feel it. They feel it in the private language of people who know they were wrong, but cannot afford to say so publicly, in the specific discomfort of watching someone they dismissed become undismissible, in the awareness that the narrative they built about you is increasingly incompatible with the reality you are creating, that the story they told is being contradicted by the story you are living, and stories that get contradicted by reality don't quietly disappear. They become records of the people who told them. They are becoming records. Their judgment about you is becoming their legacy. And their legacy is, they were wrong about the one who became everything. The specific texture of what was taken from you matters. Because vengeance is proportional. What was taken shapes what is returned. The specific nature of the loss determines the specific nature of the restoration. And understanding this, understanding that the universe's accounting is precise rather than approximate, changes how you read what is happening in your life right now. They took your credibility. The restoration is a reputation that exceeds anything you had before they attacked it, because credibility that has been tested under the conditions you experienced, that survived coordinated assault, that held through the specific pressure of people with resources and motivation trying to dismantle it, is qualitatively different from credibility that was never tested. It carries weight that untested credibility cannot carry. It is believed at a depth that comfortable credibility doesn't reach. They took your community. The restoration is relationships built on frequency rather than proximity, on genuine recognition rather than convenience. The people who found you after the stripping, who chose you without the credentials, who connected with you in the valley, who stayed through the season that made staying costly, are a different quality of connection than the community built before. What was taken was quantity. What is being restored is depth. They took your certainty. The restoration is something they could never have given you even if they wanted to. Not certainty that depends on external validation. Certainty that lives inside the specific knowing that someone who has been through the worst and held who they are through all of it develops about themselves. Certainty that doesn't need the room to confirm it because it was tested in a room with no witnesses and held anyway. This is the accounting. Precise, proportional, already happening. There is something specific that happened in your body during the worst of it. A kind of settling, not the settling of resignation or defeat, the settling of someone who has hit the actual floor and discovered that the floor holds, that there is a bottom to the descent and it is survivable, that the thing they were most afraid of, the total loss, the complete stripping, the worst case scenario actually arriving, was survivable. Most people spend their entire lives managing their fear of the worst case scenario, organizing their decisions around avoiding it, making compromises and surrenders and silent agreements with people who don't deserve their compliance, in order to prevent the floor from arriving. You hit the floor. And the floor held. And now you carry something that the people who have spent their lives in avoidance of that floor cannot carry, a specific fearlessness, not the performed fearlessness of bravado, the earned fearlessness of someone who knows through direct experience that what was most feared is not fatal, that the worst they can do was done, and here you are, intact, different, transformed, but here. This fearlessness is visible to people who know what to look for. The president who chose you for justice felt it. The leaders who become fans of chosen souls recognize it immediately, because fearlessness of the earned kind, the kind that comes from having been through rather than around, is the rarest and most valuable quality in any room. It is the specific quality that makes chosen souls ungovernable by threat, that makes them incorruptible by intimidation, that makes them impossible to manage through the fear-based mechanisms that manage most people. You cannot be threatened by the loss of what you've already lost and survived losing. That makes you the most dangerous kind of free. If you hit the floor and discovered it holds, if you survived the worst they could do and came out free, type floor holds in the comments. The ones who know, know. The silence that surrounded you in the low season was not empty. It was full of the work that formation requires, full of the processing, the breaking down, the integration, the specific internal labor that produces chosen souls who operate differently from the people who never went underground. The silence looked like nothing to the people who needed your activity as proof of your relevance, who measured your value by your visibility, who assumed that a person not performing is a person not becoming. They assumed wrong. Underground is where the most important work happens, where the root system develops, where the foundation that will support what's coming gets laid, layer by layer, in the absence of applause and recognition, and external confirmation that anything is happening, where the person you are becoming gets built in the quiet that the old version never allowed, because the old version was always performing, always managing perception, always maintaining the presentation of a self that was partly real and partly constructed to be acceptable to people whose acceptance you needed. The stripping took the constructed part. What grew in the silence was only real. And real, in a chosen soul, grows towards something the constructed self could never have reached, reaches toward assignments that the performance-based version was too managed, too careful, too invested in its own maintenance to access, grows into spaces that the self-protecting version would have been too afraid of to enter. What grew in your silence is now what you walk into rooms with. And rooms can feel the difference between constructed and real. They respond differently, they receive differently, the same words land differently when they come from someone whose depth is actual rather than performed. The same presence creates different fields when it comes from someone who went underground and came back with something that the surface life cannot produce. The rooms that were closed to the constructed version open to the real one. Not because you worked the room better, because you became something the room cannot ignore. The people who are watching your rise and cannot reconcile it with what they know about what was done to you, they're experiencing something specific. It's a recalibration of their model of reality. Their model said that what was done to you produces certain outcomes, that the category of damage you sustained has predictable trajectories, that they have seen enough of the world to know how these stories end, and your story is not ending the way their model predicted. This creates cognitive dissonance that they don't have clean language for. Some of them will try to explain it away, will find reasons that your rise is temporary, is circumstantial, is dependent on conditions that will eventually reverse, will build narratives that preserve their model, by making your elevation the exception that proves the rule rather than the evidence that the rule was wrong. They need the rule to be right, more than they need to understand what you actually are, so they will maintain the model and assign you the status of anomaly. Let them. Anomalies that persist long enough become the new standard. Exceptions that accumulate enough evidence eventually revise the rule. What you are doing, by continuing to rise and continuing to produce and continuing to exist at a level that contradicts their framework, is quietly, persistently, irrevocably rewriting what they believe is possible. Not for everyone, for chosen souls who go through and come out the other side, for the specific category of person who absorbs maximum damage and converts it into maximum power, for the ones who are watching you right now and experiencing what your rise produces in people who are still in their own valley, still underground, still in the silence. What your rise produces in them is the most important thing you will ever do. It produces possibility, the specific, visceral, undeniable possibility that the valley is not permanent, that the underground is not the final location, that the silence ends and what emerges from it is something the wound alone could never have produced. Your vengeance is their permission slip. Your rise tells them their rise is coming. And that is the fullest, most devastating form of the revenge they never saw coming. The people who tried to define your ceiling have a problem. They built their comfort on a static version of you, on the version that existed at a particular moment under particular pressures in particular circumstances that no longer apply. They photographed you at your lowest, and made the photograph the reference, decided that the image captured in that window the version of you under maximum stress, stripped of resources, operating without the depth that what came after would build, was the permanent truth. They are still looking at the photograph, while you are standing in front of them, transformed. And the distance between the photograph and what you actually are now is not a small distance. It is not an incremental improvement on what they captured. It is a different category of person, a different frequency, a different architecture. The photograph they're consulting is their reference is so outdated that it is no longer a photograph of you. It is a historical document of someone who no longer exists, a record of a version that was only ever temporary, that was always going to give way to what you became when the conditions that were suppressing you were removed. The conditions are removed. What they suppressed is now what you are. And what you are is nothing their photograph prepared them for. Their outdated reference is why they keep being surprised, keep being caught off guard by your decisions, your moves, your capacity, your impact. They're consulting a document that has no relationship to the current reality. They are navigating their response to you with a map of a territory that no longer exists, and the mismatch between their map and the actual terrain is producing the specific disorientation of people who are certain they understand something that they fundamentally do not. You have outrun their understanding of you. You have exceeded every model they built. You are operating outside every framework they designed to contain you. And there is nowhere they can go to get an updated photograph, because you are not going to stand still long enough for them to take one. If they're still operating from a photograph of you that no longer exists, type different person now in the comments. Let the record show. Here is what the ones who know you privately are watching in real time. They see the shift in your eyes, the specific quality that arrived after the breaking and the reformation, a clarity that was not present before, a stillness that did not exist in the version of you that needed their approval or feared their disapproval or managed itself according to their perception, a stillness that comes from having nothing left to protect that is not already protected by what you became. They watch you move through situations that would have destabilized the old version, watch you encounter people who used to trigger your performing self, people with power, with status, with the specific kind of authority that the old version deferred to and not perform, not manage, not calculate what this interaction requires of you. Just be present, just be what you are, without adjustment, without apology, without the microcompressions that used to happen whenever you were around people whose opinion you needed. You don't need their opinion anymore. Not because you decided not to, because what you need to feel real is no longer located in external sources, because the formation you went through moved the source of your certainty from outside to inside, made it internal, self-generating, not dependent on the confirmation of people who may or may not be qualified to confirm it. The ones who are close enough to see this are watching something they cannot fully articulate but deeply recognize. They are watching freedom in real time. The specific freedom of someone who went through the worst and came out the other side no longer needing the things they used to organize their life around acquiring, no longer performing for the approval that used to feel like oxygen, no longer adjusting their frequency for the comfort of people who were threatened by it, no longer making themselves smaller so that the people around them could feel larger. And freedom of this kind earned freedom, formed freedom, the freedom of someone who lost everything and discovered that what remains is enough, and is real and is unremovable, is more magnetic than anything the performing version ever produced. Rooms respond to it, people are drawn to it, opportunities organize around it, the universe appears to conspire in its favor, not through magic, but through the simple physics of what happens when someone stops living partially and starts living from the full depth of what they actually are. Everything that was withheld from the partial version flows to the full one. The enemies are in their own season now. Not the season they planned, not the continuation of the narrative they built about themselves as the ones who handled you and moved on. A different season, the season of consequences, the season where the specific architecture of what they built on your suppression starts revealing its foundational instability. Because everything built on a lie is unstable, everything constructed on the suppression of what is true is subject to the correction that truth eventually performs. The structures they built using your setback as foundation, the confidence, the positioning, the relationships, the narratives, all of it built on the premise that you would stay down, that the damage was permanent, that the version of you they left in the destruction was the version that would define the story. The story is being redefined. And when a story is redefined, the structures built on the old version crack, not dramatically, not all at once, but perceptibly, in ways that the people inside those structures can feel even before the outside world can see, in the specific internal awareness that the ground you built on is shifting, that the certainties you organized around are becoming uncertainties, that the person you bet against is becoming the evidence that the bet was catastrophically wrong. They feel this. They won't say so publicly, won't acknowledge it in any language that gives you what you deserve, but in the private accounting, in the 3 a.m. reality of the life they actually live versus the life they perform, they know what they did and they know what it produced, and they are living in the daily consequence of having been completely, irreversibly wrong. That is vengeance without you lifting a finger. That is the universe closing the loop with a precision that no human action could match. You don't have to do anything to them. You just have to keep becoming. The becoming does everything. The final reading is this. You were not a victim who recovered. You were a chosen soul who was pushed into the specific initiation that chosen souls require and could not have chosen for themselves, because no one chooses what you went through. No one volunteers for the fire you were put in. No one raises their hand for the level of loss and betrayal and targeted destruction that was applied to you. The initiation chose you. The fire found you. The pressure was applied not by accident but by the precise alignment of circumstances that produces, in the specific architecture of chosen souls, what nothing gentler could produce. The ones who did it thought they were ending you. The universe used them to complete you. And the completion is not a version of you that made peace with what happened, not a version that healed enough to function, not a version that rebuilt close enough to before that you can pretend the destruction didn't happen. The completion is a version that requires what happened. That is only possible because of what happened. That carries in every cell the signature of what was done and what was forged in the doing. You are the answer to their attack. You are the evidence that they were wrong. You are the living, breathing, undeniable refutation of every conclusion they made about your ceiling, your character, your capacity, your future. You are the vengeance. Not the act, the state, the permanent, activated, irreversible state of being the thing they tried to prevent, becoming the thing they were, certain they'd stopped, existing at the level they decided was closed to you, operating in the rooms they said would never open, carrying the weight they said you couldn't handle, building the legacy they said was beyond you. Every day you exist is what you are is the vengeance. Every morning you rise is the delivery of it. Every result you produce is another installment. Every room that responds to you is another confirmation. Every person who looks at your life and recalibrates their understanding of what is possible for people who went through what you went through, every single one of them is the ripple of a vengeance that goes further than they ever imagined damage could reach. They thought they damaged you. They have no idea what they started. You are confirmed. Not by this, by everything that led to this, by every seizing you held, when holding was the only available move, by every moment you stayed true when the true version was the costly one, by every choice you made in the dark when no one was watching and the easier path was fully available and you chose the real one anyway. The confirmation was written in those moments. This is just the moment when the physical world caught up to what was already written. Chosen soul, you are the vengeance. Not almost, not becoming, not on your way. Confirmed. Walk in it, build in it, breathe in it. Let every person who needs to see what happens to chosen souls who go through the fire and come out the other side. Let them see it in you, fully, without minimizing, without the apologetic smallness that used to make you safe to people who needed you contained. You are not safe to them anymore. You are the confirmation that what they tried to do to you does not work on chosen souls. You are the warning to everyone watching that chosen souls are not destroyable by the methods used to destroy ordinary people. You are the proof. You are the vengeance. And the vengeance is just getting started. To understand exactly what comes next in your chosen soul journey, watch the video on your screen right now. The next level is waiting.